Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest.
Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. On this week's episode, we've got a couple of friends who both happen to have new but very different projects out this month. Amber Tamblyn and Mac McCaughan. Tamblyn is an actor, writer, director, poet, activist with a wildly diverse resume. She may be best known for roles on Joan of Arcadia and 2.5 Men, but that's only the tip of a pretty incredible iceberg. She's written well-received books of poetry, including 2015's Dark Sparkler. She directed the 2016 film Paint It Black, which features a score by today's other guest. She's one of the founders of the Time's Up movement and the author of a book about feminism and activism called Era of Ignition. And now she's starring in the FX Hulu adaptation of the comic book Y: The Last Man, in which every man on Earth suddenly dies, except one. It's pretty awesome so far, and she's great in it. Now, Mac McCaughan also wears many hats, chiefly as singer-guitarist of the long-running band Superchunk and co-owner of the righteously vaunted independent record label Merge. During the pandemic, after suffering a sort of writer's block, McCaughan wrote and recorded a solo album, though he didn't exactly do it alone. The Sound of Yourself features a bunch of guests that Mac wrangled over the internet, one of the only good uses for that damn thing, including Mackenzie Scott of Torres, Michael Lerner of Telekinesis, and many more. It's a quietly contemplative record that mixes McCaughan's perfect pop with some more ambient instrumental passages, something he and Tamblyn talk about in this podcast. Check out a little bit of the song Dawn Bends, on which Mac got an assist from both Superchunk drummer John Worster and the entirety of Yola Tango. In this lively conversation, we get to hear about how Mac and Amber didn't quite cross paths during the pandemic when he graciously loaned his house to Amber, her husband David Cross, and their young daughter. They also chat about writer's block and whether that exists, what it was like for Tamblyn to play an ultra-conservative in Y: The Last Man, and their other recent projects, which include the score for Amy Poehler's movie Moxie for Mac, and a bunch of new books for Amber. They also connect about ambient music and the sheer power of Bob Mould. Enjoy.
Hi, Mac from Superchunk.
Hi, Amber from Y: The Last Man.
How's life?
It's funny because your family was in our house like a little bit more than a year ago when we weren't in our house.
Yeah.
And it's so wild to think about.
You were our saving grace for that. We were trying to go visit David's family, his sister and her wife in Georgia, and we didn't want to fly. So we drove from New York to Georgia, and, lo and behold, looking at a map, I thought, this, our friend lives right in this section, right between those two places. I wonder if we can stay at their house.
We are well situated, and that was like the scariest time to travel, I think. I mean, it was just, you didn't even want to get out of the car at a rest stop or whatever.
Yeah. No, we were extremely grateful to be in a friend's home rather than a hotel, which felt much more stressful. I mean, we even talked about sleeping in the car. We just didn't know.
Think of all the time we could have saved not washing our groceries over the last year and a half. If we knew then what we know now.
Yeah, that was a really funny period of time.
Well, I started watching your new TV show, and it's so good, and it's so crazily appropriate for the mindset of now and a pandemic. And then I looked at when those comic books came out, and it was like 15 years ago or something like that. Yeah,
20 years ago.
So you made that in Canada?
Yeah, we made it in Canada. It's been in development on and off for many years. I sort of was attached to the project about 3 years ago under a different person who was developing it, creating it at that time. And then it sort of moved on from that and moved into a different iteration and different version, which is the one you see now, which is created and written, showrun by Eliza Clark, who I think did a really phenomenal job. She's for folks who loved Animal Kingdom and The Killing and Rubicon. Those were all her shows that she was a part of and wrote for. So, she's got that style and that vision that is darkly humorous, terrifying, thrilling. She's got all of that put together.
The pacing is so good. I'm only a few episodes in, and I'm not going to give anything away, but just how it reveals what's happening and who is who, what the characters are. It's really satisfying in that way that it's not giving it to you all at once.
Oh, I'm so glad you feel that way. Just you wait. It gets crazier if you can believe such a thing.
I love it. And it's like we've all become so like addicted to entertainment. I mean, obviously everyone had their favorite shows before we were locked indoors for a year and a half, but in our family we became so reliant on like, what are we watching? What are we watching next? We have to have something to look forward to. Yeah,
David and I went through 18 seasons of Top Chef last year.
Oh my God. That's
actually
dedication.
That's the mood we were in. We were like so deeply filled with depression and anxiety that we're like, we just want to watch things get chopped and eaten.
Well, in my fiction consumption, I was looking for novels about pandemics. Like I was just like, I'll read anything, Station 11, this book called Severance by Ling Ma.
Yeah. Oh, Station 11's becoming a TV show as well.
Oh, really? I mean, that was so good. And so like this, Why the Last Man feels like it's in line with those things in a way,
That's good.
Yeah. I have a question for you, though, not about your acting career, but about poetry, because I feel like a lot of people had this similar thing happen where for me, the first 8 months of lockdown, 6 months, like I could not write a song to save my life. I mean, I couldn't even get started on it.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you wrote during the pandemic, like could you do creative things in that world?
I wrote one pretty profound poem, which was for New York, that the Academy of American Poets published. I think it's called To a New Dawning. It's a fairly long poem, but it is specifically about New York during the pandemic last year in March and April when literally thousands of people were dying. But there was still such a sense of community, which is very New York, is people couldn't leave their houses, but they would stand on stoops and blast music, and people would party on a stoop and bring out beers from their own houses and drinks and drink from very, very far away. But people here will say, fine, we'll take your stay-at-home order, but fuck you, we're still gonna rage.
Right.
And I love that about this city, is that people will just come together when things are really intense. So I wrote a poem about that I'm very proud of. I did do some writing, but more because I think I was staving off feeling the sadness. And as Johnny Cash would say, when you get the blues, get rhythm. And that's very much something that I feel I do when I get depressed. But then as it started to feel like it was really, everybody at once, we kind of felt like, all right, we're going to hunker down. We're going to just be in this. And then when you realized it was going to be a lot longer than, say, 6 months or a year, I think that's when I felt like I was just, floating. And this glaze came over my eyes and my creative life. But so you couldn't write any songs. Could you play any music?
Like maybe 2 weeks before lockdown in North Carolina, I went to Los Angeles and had a meeting and watched a cut of the film Moxie that Amy Poehler directed and started working on the score for that movie 2 weeks before lockdown. So then once lockdown happened, I was like, well, I guess I know what I'm doing every day. In my basement is working on this score. I'm not going anywhere. So I was working on music, but it's so different writing a film score than writing songs, because songs is just like, all right, produce something out of thin air, whereas a movie has a thing there for you to work with, and someone saying, we would like something that's kind of like this for this scene. There's instructions, there's some material that you're working with. So I could do that, and I felt very lucky that I had that to work on every day for several months.
I have to say, for folks that don't know this, they should know this, that Mac also scored the film that I wrote and directed, Painted Black. And You are fucking good at that job, Mac. You are so, in your other world, in your other life, I mean, you're just the best. I remember Amy texted me and said, hey, how was it working with Mac? And I said, run.
That asshole.
Run, don't walk.
Oh, that's so nice. Well, I learned a lot working on your movie. That was kind of the most real film scoring that I had done, and then learned a lot working with Amy and her great editors and producers on Moxie. So that was awesome. But in terms of just picking up an acoustic guitar or something and writing a song, like I couldn't even, I don't know, it's just a very weird, I don't know if I've ever had what you would call writer's block before, but that was maybe what it was like. It was just like, it just doesn't mean anything. Like, I don't even know what I'm doing here.
Both of my mentors have passed now, my writing mentors, Wanda Coleman and Jack Hirschman, who just recently died. But Wanda, who, speaking of poetry, was a prolific poet, gifted poet from Los Angeles. And she used to say that there's no such thing as writer's block, that's when the muse is resting. And you have to let them rest. And that means that they're sort of going inward, going quiet to absorb information that will come out later in a great creative capacity. But I always loved that as an image of letting the muse sleep and not sort of putting this pressure on our creative life forces, even though we're, in a moment like that, we're going through so much, and you would think, oh, an artist is absorbing so much pain and trauma and so many different feelings that the output is kind of paused for a moment, right, while the well is filled.
Yeah. Maybe my brain just got so bored sitting around here this, like, you've got to do something. And then I started working on stuff. Then, even though I didn't really know what that would be, it was just kind of like, Did some of the songs come out for your new record? Are they about the pandemic, about the last 2 years at all? Or do they feel totally separate from that? Well, the whole record was pretty much written and recorded in January of this year. So kind of like towards the end of lockdown, where everyone's still inside, pre-vaccination, everything. And I mean, my God, like, I definitely don't want to be the person that's like, hey, everybody, like, check out my record about the pandemic. Like, no one wants to hear that. But I think it's just more about, like, a lot of songs that I've written and records that I've made. It's about whatever is, like, happening in your brain at that time, like during that time period, So it certainly reflects something about the outside, but it's more of an interior thing. And so I think it is about, like, what is going through your mind when you're just left alone with your with your thoughts and the people closest to you, So certainly, songs about insomnia and rumination and feeling like you don't know what time it is or what day it is, and that kind of glaze that you were talking about that just kind of like comes over. So it's a lot about that. And then there's about half the record is instrumental, and I think that reflects kind of the kind of music that I was listening to and that my brain wanted to hear during that time, which was a lot of ambient music and things that were maybe, I don't want to say not challenging to my brain, but just challenging in a different way, maybe. I didn't want to hear a lot of words. I didn't want to hear a lot of loud rock music.
I completely relate to that. And
I think I learned, it was, I was seeking out things that I never knew about before, because I was like, okay, I've listened to this Harold Budd record a lot of times now. Like, maybe I should find something else to hear that's along these lines. And even though record stores were closed for a while there, record stores on the internet were not closed. So I was, for better or worse, able to spend a lot of time shopping for records.
I did a very similar thing. Do you know this group, the guy Ulrich Schnaus, I think is his name?
Yeah, I like those records.
Yeah, there's an older record called Faraway Trains. I think that's the name of it.
I'll look that up.
That's probably not Faraway Trains Passing By. That's the name of it. And there's a monotony to it. I used to listen to it on airplanes. It was my favorite thing to listen to on an airplane and just stare out the window for like a solid hour. And you really just could let your brain wander. I think David Lynch calls it going fishing. He goes fishing for creative ideas. But for me, I really loved that record. But I found myself sort of rediscovering it and listening to it over and over and over. I think it also just was there was a nostalgia to it and a time of traveling a lot, flying a lot. I mean, we probably, between you and me too, used to fly a whole bunch for tours or whatever that is. But, I was nostalgic for that sense of going somewhere or being between places instead of stuck in one day that seems to repeat itself into hell.
I've definitely had that same thing on airplanes, is that my two kind of go-to zone out on an airplane records were Aphex Twin Ambient Works and the Brian Eno Harold Budd record, The Pearl. I know what you mean about just being able to put that on and either fall asleep or not fall asleep or think about things or not think about things. And oddly enough, like a few months before the pandemic, Superchunk played some shows in Japan, which is amazing. And I was able to get some records there that were harder to find here by some amazing Japanese artists that made ambient music. There's a guy named Hiroshi Yoshimura that Light in the Attic, a label based in Seattle, has reissued some of his records. And there's a record called Green that I maybe listened to more than any other during the pandemic. It's really beautiful. And luckily, because of the internet, you can go down some deep rabbit holes into that kind of music and just discover so many things, And so I think that I'm never going to be able to make music that sounds like music that those people make, but it's more like that was some of the input, and then the output is what you hear on my record that is the less like songy music and more. I mean, part of it is just also, I think, making a record when there's no pressure to make a record. No one's said like, we need a solo record from you this year. You know what I mean? It was just like making music for the sake of making music. Like there's no expectation. It can be anything. And my inclination is to like make a pop song or something and to have everything slightly tied up neatly. And so I think I try to fight that a little bit and just let accidents happen and stay with them instead of trying to like fix them and make them all sound right or whatever. And so I think that instrumental music, for one thing, I love a song where I don't have to write words or sing. So that's great. But also instrumental music is, I think, just slightly more open-ended if you're not trying to have it be the backing for a vocalist.
I can't believe you and I have never talked about our love for like weird, dark, ambient instrumental music before. I have so many playlists. I think Dark Sparkler was predominantly written to that instrumental Yo La Tengo album, The Sounds of Sounds of Science. In fact, I even texted Georgia that from Yo La Tengo and said, most of this book was written, which is why when I went on tour for that book and went and promoted it, I did two events with them, one here in New York and one at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, where they backed me up and we created this like hour-long poetry opera.
I mean, I know that a lot of the temp music when we were working on Paint It Black was some cool instrumental, weird, ambient music.
I write to some of that music too. I still actually have all your cues, a bunch of the MP3s like in a folder on my computer.
That's awesome.
I listen to a lot of that stuff because even if it's just a feeling, it's like the match that gets the fire going. I could go back to folders with certain songs in them that are labeled in Spotify, that are labeled under book titles, not anything else, because
that's cool.
Those songs I listen to just on repeat all the time.
Did you ever like make those playlists available for people so that they, just as like another reference point, if they already had your book or they liked your poetry or whatever, like something they could go listen to? You should do that.
No, I never thought about that. I'll do that.
I would be into that. I mean, Yo La Tengo is a huge inspiration. When making any kind of record, I often get to a point where I think like, what would they do in this
yeah,
in this musical like situation or in this moment? And I got to go on tour with them in 2002, I think it was, when they put out the record and then Nothing Turned Itself Inside Out. Myself and David Kilgour did a whole tour, and it was so educational just watching how they work and structure not just their songs, but their performances. And I think that one thing, again, like that I'm constantly fighting my impulse to fill up the space in a piece of music with like more stuff, noise or whatever. And they're so good at leaving the space and allowing things to just be super delicate. They're on all three of Yo La Tengo is our guests on a song called Dawn Bends on the record.
On the new record? Oh, wow. How about that?
My original idea was that I thought, well, Georgia, it'd be so great if Georgia could sing on this. And then I thought, like, well, maybe they can all just be on it. And so they play organ and guitar, and James plays bass, and Georgia sings on it. The fact that we can do that remotely, like have that kind of collaboration, is awesome. And I think the internet overall is maybe a net negative, but occasionally there's something like that I'm like, okay, this technology is great.
So I was in some pretty long rehearsals with them in their studio where they've recorded a lot of records. And it is, I would say, some of the most nerves I've ever felt. Just because down in that room, you know what kind of amazing work has been created. And I couldn't help but feel like a slight fraud, even though it was all about this book I had written that really spoke to them. But I remember asking Georgia if she would turn one of the poems that's in Dark Sparkler, and the book is about the lives and deaths of child star actresses, some unknown. And there was one that's like sort of fairly short, and I asked her to turn it to sing it instead of me reading it during the set. It was sort of like the interlude, the intermission, and in the center of the set was to have Georgia come to the microphone and sing it. And she was pretty nervous. I don't think she wanted to do it. And it was really Ira and James who kind of helped her see what a cool idea that would be. Her voice is probably one of my favorite singing voices out there, but I don't think I realized what a gentle and delicate experience that is for her to sing. Mm-hmm. And I just was so grateful to them that and then she was like, oh yeah, then once we got this really beautiful little piece, I think it's like 6 lines of a poem, a very short piece, but I'll never forget that as long as I live.
That's so cool. Well, and of course, once we had our vocals for this song in the mix, I'm just like, just keep turning Georgia up. But no, I think that that technology allowing us to collaborate with people at long distance, especially during the lockdown, so valuable and so cool that I could record a song and send off the tracks to Mary Lattimore, who plays harp on 2 songs, or Mackenzie Scott from Torres, who sings on a song, and have it come back. And I'm like, okay, like this song was like a thing, and now it's like a really cool thing.
I can't wait. What's the name of the record?
The album is called The Sound of Yourself. And the title came from one of the things that I did a lot, like a lot of people during the pandemic, was walk the dogs. And while I was walking the dogs, I was usually listening to podcasts or audiobooks. And one of the books I listened to was Amy Rigby reading her book, Girl to City. It's about her moving from Pittsburgh to New York City in the late 70s and kind of getting into the music scene there and opening a club and starting bands. And she talks at one point about the first time you really hear your own voice. Not, it's one thing if you and I were just sitting in a room like playing songs together or whatever, but then when you hear it like coming out of a speaker and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, like I sound like that. That's messed up. Like, I feel like I have that feeling a lot still. I've been doing this for a long time. So, yeah, and I think that idea of, again, being stuck with your own thoughts, stuck with your own voice in this time was something that a lot of people had to confront, whether you're writing songs about it or not.
Yeah, this was confront is the absolute word in totality. Every person I know had to deal with something. Most people I knew were dealing with a lot of health issues, myself included. I found out I was allergic to eggs.
Oh my gosh, what?
I know, it's so out of left field, but I mean, every day of my life I've eaten eggs since I was a child. Like,
I was going to say, when I think about the number of eggs that I fried during the pandemic, that's like a frightening thing.
I just had these crazy physical issues, achy joints. I thought I had an autoimmune disease. And then I found that out. And it was very sad, but at least it was an answer. But I thought, what a year for that to reveal itself.
But is that something that, how you can just develop allergies at different points in your life?
I also found out that I had Lyme. I had Lyme, so that was sort of another part. So it was never treated. And I only found all this stuff out because I spent like half of the pandemic pretty sick and trying to see doctors and figuring out what was wrong with me. And then finally found a really good doctor who did the right blood tests. And that's when I found out I had those 2 things. And he's like, basically your gut is just wrecked from the eggs, and it's making your body allergic to other things. And you have Lyme that was never treated. I had to go pretty hardcore for a few months. But I think the fact that that all came up, it was like, and I have lots of friends who had similar issues. I had to go in to get an endoscopy, down the throat thing. And the gastroenterologist who I saw, he said, it's unprecedented how many people are coming in for that and colonoscopies and just unprecedented. He's like, I've never been in my office so much as I have been this year because people
and is that because people are just sitting around going like, I should probably have this checked out?
I think the truth is, they call your gut the second brain,
right?
Because it is. I mean, that's where where you make all your serotonin and dopamine, and it's where basically your body manifests a lot of its psycho-emotional life, and it's where your central nervous system lives to a degree. Everything sort of lives out of the gut. So I think when there's that much stress being manifested and your fight or flight is so sensitive and severe. Hang on, my dad's calling me and he's interrupting our thing.
Oh, Russ.
Go away, Dad. God.
He's someone who's allowed to interrupt this call.
I know. I almost answered it. If he calls again, I will. But yeah, so I think I was, I think when you were manifesting that much stress, it instantly goes to your gut. We were all also drinking a lot. I mean, I was averaging 3 vodka sodas a night, every single night, unless I had like a cold, which no one had a cold because going anywhere. And my body just finally went, you know what? That's quite enough.
Well, I'm glad that you figured out what that was, and like amazing when something actually works to remedy it.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm so lucky to have our kids and my wife, Andrea, like so lucky to be around them for a year and a half. But also you realize like, oh my God, I am bugging the shit out of these people with my insanities. And normally you're leaving the house every day and you don't have to, subject everyone 24 hours to like whatever bananas things you're doing.
I think that's after this first year of the pandemic. I think they said something like the number of divorces was unprecedented. It had like skyrocketed, as I think people really suddenly realized who they were connected to. But yeah, it was hard. I mean, I think it was hard for everybody. David and I, when we were shooting Why the Last Man, which we only just finished shooting, we shot it this year. We were in Toronto for almost 6 months. And it was an unfortunate time to be there because, Toronto and Canada, for the most part, had been doing really well last year, all through last year. And then January and February this year, they hit their peak. And they got hit with COVID really hard. Their numbers spiked really high. And so they had essentially a stay-at-home order for months and months. About 90% of the time there was a stay-at-home order, completely closed. So there we were, in the middle of a Toronto winter, which lasts until May practically, with Marlo, with our daughter, who couldn't go out and go anywhere, who was sort of displaced from our home and her caretaker here and our lives here. And we were up there with nowhere to go. And you also can't leave the country, really. You can't go anywhere because you have to do a mandatory 2-week quarantine. David and I have been together for 13 years, and it was the most challenging time, I think. It was really, really hard. He actually went home a month early, as he should, with Marlo, because they just wanted to, come back here to the U.S. Everything was doing.
Let's go where we can get a vaccine for at least David and,
Exactly. I mean, he came back and did that. But I remember about 3 weeks in after they had left, I texted him and I was like, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I don't miss you yet.
But I do want to tell you that.
Do we need to talk about this? He was like, no, I don't miss you either. So I was like, okay, good. Now I miss you because you said that. But that was the truth. I was like, I miss Marlo, but I really don't miss you. And he's like, I don't miss you either. I'm like, great. I'll miss you in about another 2 weeks.
It's so confusing emotionally. To me, in some ways, like, I think I just got so in a mode that then when it's like, hey, we can go do stuff now. I was like, I don't really want to do stuff now, And also, I guess everyone's different. Some people were just like so psyched to start doing stuff as soon as possible once we were vaccinated. And I just still feel like, I don't know, like it just all feels weird.
So I think going out on tour for you is going to be especially great. It's going to force you to get out of your head in the way that life doesn't really allow for that at the moment.
I hope you're right. I mean, it's also a strange place to be in your head of just like not trusting anyone, because I feel like, we went and played a show in Ohio, Superchunk did. First show in 18 months. It was outdoors. That was great. But in Ohio, unlike here, there's no mask mandate. No one was wearing a mask. It was like everyone was just back to normal. And I'm like, y'all know there's not back to normal, right? And it makes me so on edge. I can get misanthropic anyway in the best of times, but that just makes me feel like y'all are just fucking this up for everyone.
David's with his tour. The tour isn't even that big. I mean, he's really going to a very limited amount of cities because he's really strict about the venues and whether or not you have to show proof of vaccination. And for us, we've got a kid who can't get vaccinated. So it's just not even a question. We have to still, maintaining our livelihoods, we have to still protect her as much as possible. But I get that. That's really stressful. And it's also infuriating. It's just so frustrating to see the selfishness for people who don't have health risks, who are just not getting it for a myriad of excuses, in my opinion.
I'm looking forward to playing these songs for kind of small groups of people who I feel like for the most part will be wearing their masks and are just down with all the rules. Everyone's into it. That's the only reason we can be there is because we're following the rules about this stuff. And, I realized it's really the longest I've gone between playing a show in a club probably since I was 17 years old or something like that. So I am looking forward to being in a room with those people. I just hope that I can get past my distrust of the general world out there in order to enjoy that time,
You'll get there. You'll see.
But I'm psyched that people are excited to go see music. That's a very heartening feeling. People just who have missed it and want to go hear it in person.
It's literally why David and I are coming to 2 of your shows in the same state.
That's awesome. It is just very, as much as I love listening to records, it's just a different thing, and it feels different.
We're going to be looking at this for a long time, but the PTSD and the mountain of grief, especially because we went through this pandemic in an election year. So much of our focus from last year was, we didn't even talk about that, but the stress of thinking that this person, this narcissist, would possibly be here again to continue the problem that he created with the pandemic in the first place. It sucked everyone's attention and energy for the entire year to push to do everything they could to make sure he wasn't reelected. I'm not even going to say his name. But because of that, I don't think that anybody was really able to focus or think about or process the death and the grief and the separation and the complete and utter loss of human touch. I mean, talk about things that we never thought mattered, but a hug, touching someone on the arm, seeing your parents, your friends, feeling the literal physical vibrations of a guitar, a loud guitar in a room. I mean, I would walk around Toronto and I had to get different headphones because the headphones I had, I couldn't play Bob Mould loud enough. Right, and then I had to go get other ones because I wanted it louder. I wanted to feel it in my stomach because I missed that. And I wanted that. And it was the only thing that touched my sadness and my anger, my sorrow. And so I think you going out on tour is a gift to everybody because it's going to make people remember their bodies, if that makes sense.
And the air moving.
And the air moving, and just it's going to let us feel. And we haven't really been able to feel for 2 years.
Well, we won't be as loud as Bob Mould.
That's fine.
Okay. Just a heads up. No one is.
No one is.
Bob's record coming out last year was awesome, I think, because, talk about a thing that people were hungry for, again, probably no one expected a new Bob Mould record in the middle of like a lockdown. But man, when that record came out, even with no tour, no anything, like people were so excited about that. And at Merge, we really found that people were still hungry for music. But yeah, I'm looking forward to playing these shows, and literally every day I practice, which I never really I haven't practiced in a long time. Superchunk doesn't really practice per se, but I just have to like learn how to play songs again. You know, it's kind of wild.
Yeah, I bet.
Well, what's your next project? Are you going to be working on a book or another season of this show? Or
I hope that the show gets picked up for a second season. That's my great hope. I think it's really important. It has a lot to say about gender and patriarchal point of views, and again on grief and how grief is processed and manifested and or weaponized. In this case, predominantly by women. But besides that, while I wait to hear that, I did, we were talking earlier about writing songs, and, you were writing in January, but I wrote a bunch of book proposals. I kind of went off my rocker and I wrote like 4 book proposals that were really good. One of them I had been thinking about for a while, which is the one that ended up selling. I wrote like 30 new poems that are really good. Some of them about the pandemic. Some of them also, they're sort of femme fatale revenge themed poems that are steeped in real life and also fantasy. One of them was about actually sitting in the courtroom during Harvey Weinstein's trial. And it's a dark, funny, cruel, great poem.
You were there?
I was there. Yeah,
wow.
I was there with a bunch of women from Time's Up. But that's a book that is going to take a while. I think that's going to be my next long-term writing project as far as, finding a home for that one, just in the way that Dark Sparkler took many years to find its home. But this other book that I am writing that Park Row Books is doing, which I'm very excited about, is called Listening in the Dark. And it's a book about women's intuition. So it's a look at the etymology and the history of women's intuition, told through many different stories of women who give their perspectives about their relationships to their own intuition and how they came to sort of understand their guts, how they work from their guts, how they've ignored their guts, and what kind of repercussions and consequences have come through that. So that's what I'm sort of in the middle of, in the thick of right now, is editing this anthology.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, before we go, I do want to say, like, watching you in this show, is it a spoiler to say that you play a very conservative person in this show?
No, it's not a spoiler at all, no.
I mean, what is that like? I know you're an actor, you're acting, but how do you bring an authentic feeling to something that is so antithetical to your person?
Well, I think, so what I will say is I play this character named Kimberly Campbell Cunningham, and she's the daughter of the President of the United States, who's sort of a John McCain type figure. And she has 3 sons and a husband, and she comes from a very traditional conservative Republican household. And her entire identity is through her relationships to her father and her kids. She's written books on, how modern feminism is destroying our boys' ability to be who they are. She's sort of like a bit of a pundit, talking head type figure, sort of like equal parts Meghan McCain and Ivanka Trump. And in the pilot, all cisgendered men die from this mysterious illness. Everyone drops dead at the same time. Her entire identity is wiped out in a matter of minutes. So who does this woman become past that? And I really haven't acted in quite a while. And I told myself that if I was going to act again, I wanted to find something that really challenged me. So that should answer your question. This was challenging to me both because it was a type of woman I didn't really understand, but also because I knew in order for her to be as powerful as she ends up becoming and as terrifying as she sort of becomes, that she also had to be deeply understood and loved, that at the root of who she is, there had to be real empathy.
Right. Like if you played it with some sort of archness or like over the top villainess thing, it wouldn't work.
And I also just think it would be kind of obvious.
It can't be a wink, in other words.
No winking. The point of this story was not to create bias premise based on a political ideal. The point of the story was to question and examine all different kinds of women and a few men who the only one who happens to be cisgender, who happens to be alive, of which no one understands why, but to sort of examine how these people exist in the world in the absence of the male gaze. So almost looking at it through the female gaze, which is not always a great thing. I mean, a lot of the show is like Lord of the Flies, but with ladies. It's like, it gets pretty fucked up. So to me, that was just interesting. And I thought, well, I think it makes sense that they would come to me for this part, because it is very different and very antithetical to sort of who I am personally. But it was a wonderful exploration. And so that for me, the challenge was a real joy.
Well, you're very frighteningly realistic as that character in this show. Yeah, it's really good. Well, we've collaborated before on your movie, but also the first time we collaborated, I was playing music behind you reading a poem when you came down here to help fight against the anti-gay marriage bill in North Carolina. We should do that again sometime. That would be awesome.
That would be amazing. You just, you let me know. You know where to find me. You need a feminist poet. I'm always here.
We all need a feminist poet.
We all need a feminist poet. Let's put it on a shirt, Mac.
Okay. Well, it's great to talk to you, Amber.
Yeah, so good to talk to you. This was so wonderful to connect. I feel like we're, drinking beers somewhere, hanging out.
Well, it's like seeing you in person, but it will be great to really see you in person in a few weeks.
Yes, I look forward to it.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to Amber Tamblyn and Mac McCaughan for chatting. His new album and her new show are both fantastic, and I encourage you to check them out. And if you like what you heard today, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting services and or social channels. This episode was produced by Melissa Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.